We are going to go to New Mexico next. Chris?
Hello. Thank you for having me, Jackie. Thanks to everyone who's put work into getting this summit together. It's a lot of work, I can tell you. And thanks to all the speakers who have already shared their perspectives and wisdoms. My name is Chris Smith. I work for Wild Earth Guardians, which is a nonprofit advocacy organization that does work across the American West. I'm coming to you from my hometown of Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is on land stolen from Tewa-speaking people. Wild Earth Guardians works to protect and restore the wildlife, wild places, wild rivers, and health of the American West. We were founded just over 30 years ago as forest guardians here in northern New Mexico to protect Mexican spotted owl habitat from clear-cut logging, mostly on national forests. And since then, we've kind of racked up a big history of monumental wins, mostly against extractive and consumptive industries. A lot of those victories have come in the courts, but certainly we're doing other things now. And as I mentioned, we're a regional organization at this point. Our Beaver work, I think, comes in four major forms. For a long time, we ran a restoration program focused in New Mexico, but with a little bit of work in Colorado as well on riparian restoration. So that includes beaver dam analogs, willow plantings, exclusionary fencing, other tactics. For a variety of reasons, that program has wound down, but we're still supporting the work of other organizations doing restoration work. We advocate against recreational and commercial trapping, which I'll get into a little bit more on the next slide. We promote coexistence policies between humans and native carnivores and native ecosystem engineers like beavers. And we work to reform the systems of governance, especially at the state level, that dictate wildlife policy. So we're trying to align state wildlife agencies with public interest, best available science, and 21st century ethic coexistence. Great. Next slide is beaver regulations in New Mexico. So this is kind of a blend of both policy and stances. People have touched on trapping in various states. Currently in New Mexico, fur bearers, which beavers are among, can be trapped from November 1st to March 15th with no bag limits whatsoever. However, that is set to change in April of 2022, because just this last year, we passed legislation in New Mexico, which bans all commercial and recreational trapping across all public lands in New Mexico. So private trapping will still be allowed moving into the future, but our public lands, of which New Mexico has a lot, will be off limits to private and commercial trapping. And that trapping has taken a toll on our beaver population. From 2013 to 2020, at least 659 beavers were killed by private trappers. And we don't have a huge beaver population in New Mexico anymore, so that's not an insignificant number. Again, this is more of a stance than a policy, but beavers are still seen primarily, I think, as a nuisance animal in New Mexico due to their impact on cottonwoods and our acequia system, especially in the north where I live, and for other reasons in other parts of the state. And even with the implementation of our new trapping ban on public lands, beavers will still be killed and trapped both on public and private lands if they are seen to be doing damage to waterways or property or crops. And there are some restrictions in play for those, but by and large, they're fair game, which I think is an unfortunate paradigm. Relocation is only being done by our state game agency at this point and can only be done by our state game agency. And there's really limited capacity at this point. Relocations are, I would say, opportunistic, where kind of sites and capacity and beavers and interests and volunteers align, which does happen, and I'm grateful for that, but it's not kind of a systemic effort or approach that I would like to see. And then finally, again, this is unfortunately a stance and not a policy, but our state did pass a memorial in 2014 that recognizes the broad array of watershed benefits that beavers provide and calls for the state to write and implement a statewide beaver plan. Unfortunately, nothing really has been done on that plan by any of our state agencies since then. Next slide, Jackie. So I think there are a lot of challenges to restoring beavers in a significant way in New Mexico. And unfortunately, I think the biggest one is our New Mexico Department of Game and Fish and their kind of cultural and, well, let's say their cultural stance and their capacity limitations to really take on beavers in a meaningful way. We have really stifling beaver relocation policies. For example, in order to relocate a beaver anywhere, you need the written permission of any landowner or managing agency within 5 miles upstream and downstream of the site where you want to put those beavers, which, as you can imagine, is really, really hard to obtain. And moreover, you need permission on any tributary within that stretch going upstream 5 miles. So that creates a huge blot on the map where you need to get everyone aligned. And due to some of the misinformation and distrust of beavers right now, that's really hard to do. And again, that's a policy that lives with our Game and Fish Department. We still have a propensity to trap and kill beavers when they're seen as a nuisance rather than implement proactive coexistence work. For example, I had a woman call me last winter. She just saw my name on a website, and this is kind of outside of my work with Wild Earth Guardians. And she said, I've got beavers, they're eating my cottonwoods, but I know if I call Game and Fish, they're going to come kill them. And I don't want to see these beavers killed. So I got some friends together and we went and fenced off those cottonwoods, but that's, a tiny speck on a big series of complaints, most of which Game and Fish is responding to. And then there's a hesitancy to change the capacity to do beaver work. I sat down with the fur bearer person at New Mexico Game and Fish a couple of years ago and said, hey, if I went to the legislature and got you, money for a beaver person or money for some of the infrastructure that Jerry Altermat was referencing, would that be helpful? And this person who believes in the power of beavers basically said, no, we're good. So that was disappointing to hear. So, there are certainly people within the agency who believe in beavers, who want to see beavers return, and who are doing good work on the ground, but turning that culture around, I think, is really slow and really troubling. And some of the things Wild Earth Guardians is doing, which I already referenced, that is trying to turn that perspective, that ship around. Final slide, Jackie. So I do have reason for hope despite all that. I think there's a really big uptick in kind of beaver adjacent restoration work. Wild Earth Guardians, I think, played a role in starting this trend, but certainly other organizations and agencies have done their part and are continuing to do so, especially doing BDAs on public lands, riparian areas, and private landowners are doing it too. And I think that creates kind of this hands-on investment and education opportunity, which makes the community understand the work that beavers can and should be doing if they were allowed to return in anything close to their historical numbers. And I'm hoping that makes clear the role that all of our ecosystem engineers and native species play in watershed health, in storing desert water, and in replenishing our aquifers, and starts to percolate into policy changes higher up that reflect public opinion and the best available science. So I'm going to put a couple links in the chat, including my email, but also the New Mexico Beaver Summit, which I co-organized last year in case people want even more beaver content after this summit. So thanks.